He was the Duke of Beaumont, a man whose name echoed in the halls of power, and she was the one secret he could never keep. In the shadowed alcove of a forgotten library, he uttered the 5 words that shattered her world. "This is goodbye, Annelise." He turned his back on their impossible love to embrace a future of cold, hard duty, a future that did not include her. But he never counted on the sound of silence, a silence so profound, so full of despair, that it would echo across a crowded ballroom and call him back from the brink to rewrite their destiny. The London season of 1888 was a gilded cage, and Lady Annelise Beaumont felt its bars pressing in with every passing day. To the world, she was a success. The daughter of a respected baron, she was comely, well-mannered, and possessed a wit sharp enough to delight, but not so sharp as to intimidate. Suitors flocked to her, their intentions as transparent as the crystal flutes of champagne they offered. But their faces blurred into one another, a collection of eager, ambitious men who saw her not as a woman, but as a stepping stone. A pretty prize to adorn their arm and solidify their social standing. None of them saw the real Annelise. None of them knew the young woman who stole away to the neglected corner of her family's Mayfair garden to sketch the timid blossoms that fought their way through the weeds, her charcoal-stained fingers, a testament to a passion deemed unladylike. And none of them most certainly knew that she was hopelessly, irrevocably in love with a man she could never have, her distant cousin, the formidable Duke Alistair Beaumont. Tonight was the annual Hartsworth Gala, a glittering affair that marked the midpoint of the season. Annelise wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the gaslight, but she felt as though she were wearing a costume. She smiled, she curtsied, she laughed at jokes that weren't funny. All the while, her eyes scanned the room, searching for the one man who made her heart feel both impossibly full and painfully empty. Alistair, the Duke of Beaumont. He stood near the grand fireplace, a pillar of dark, commanding presence amidst the frivolity. He wasn't handsome in the conventional cherubic way of the other young lords. His features were stark, carved from granite, with a jaw that spoke of unyielding resolve, and eyes the colour of a stormy sea. He was 30 years old, burdened by the weight of a title he had inherited too young, and responsible for thousands of tenants and a legacy that stretched back centuries. Their connection was a thing of silent, stolen moments, a shared glance across a crowded room that held more conversation than an hour of polite chatter, a brief touch of hands while passing a teacup, sending a jolt through them both that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. They were cousins, yes, but far enough removed that the church would not object. Society, however, was another matter. He was a duke. She was merely a lady, the daughter of a baron with a respectable name, but a dwindling fortune. The chasm between them was a mile wide, and everyone knew it. Alistair was expected to marry for power, for wealth, for an alliance that would secure the Beaumont line for another generation. A love match with an impoverished cousin was a flight of fancy he simply could not afford. Tired of the suffocating pleasantries, Annelise slipped away from the ballroom through a set of French doors that led to a stone terrace. The cool night air was a relief. She found a secluded bench hidden behind a large marble urn, the sounds of the orchestra softening to a distant, melancholic hum. "I had a feeling I might find you out here," a deep voice said, startling her. Alistair stepped out from the shadows. He had shed the mask of ducal indifference he wore inside. Here in the moonlight, the harsh lines of his face seemed to soften, and the storm in his eyes calmed to a gentle tide. "Your Grace Annelise," said her heart, leaping into her throat. She curtsied out of habit. "Annelise, please," he murmured, stepping closer. He took her hand, his gloved fingers warm and firm around hers. There is no need for such formality between us. The world would disagree, she whispered, her gaze falling to their joined hands. Then let the world be damned for a few moments. He sat beside her on the bench, not releasing her hand. The silence that fell between them was comfortable, charged with everything they couldn't say. He was the only person with whom she didn't feel the need to perform. "My mother has presented me with a list," he said finally, his voice low and laced with weariness. "A list of suitable brides. Lady Beatrice Finch is at the top. Her father's shipping empire could single-handedly restore the north wing of the estate and fund the new irrigation systems my tenants so desperately need." Annelise felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Lady Beatrice was beautiful, accomplished, and fabulously wealthy. A perfect duchess. "She is a fine choice," Annelise managed to say, her voice hollow. Alistair turned to face her fully, his sea-grey eyes searching. "She is a stranger to me. Her laughter is like the tinkling of a chandelier. Pretty, but cold and empty. It is not like yours." He raised his free hand and gently brushed a stray curl from her cheek. His touch was electric, a spark of warmth against the chill of her skin. "When you laugh," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "it is like the sound of a brook in the springtime. It is the only music that makes any sense to me in this madhouse." Tears pricked at Annelise's eyes. This was their dance, this dangerous, beautiful, and utterly hopeless proximity. They would share these stolen moments, confessing their hearts in metaphors and whispers, only to retreat back to their designated corners when the sun rose. "Alistair, we cannot." She breathed the words, tasting like poison. "I know," he said, and the pain in his voice mirrored her own. "Duty is a cruel master, Annelise. It chains a man to his name, to his land, to everything but his own heart." He leaned in his gaze, fixed on her lips. The world seemed to melt away, leaving only the two of them on that stone bench, suspended between what was and what could never be. His scent of bergamot leather and the crisp night air filled her senses. He was going to kiss her. She knew it, and she knew that if he did, she would be lost forever. The fragile peace of their stolen moment was shattered by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. Alistair pulled back instantly, his ducal mask of cool indifference slamming back into place. Annelise straightened her posture, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Lord Percival Croft rounded the corner, a smug, predatory smile gracing his handsome face. Croft was everything Alistair was not. Where Alistair was solid and severe, Croft was sleek and charming. His words were honeyed, his compliments effusive, but his eyes held a chilling emptiness that made Annelise's skin crawl. He was wealthy from a new money family, desperate to cement their place in the aristocracy, and for reasons she couldn't fathom he had set his sights on her. "Your Grace," Croft said with a slight bow towards Alistair, though his eyes were fixed on Annelise. "And Lady Annelise, I trust I am not interrupting." "You are," Alistair said, his tone clipped and cold as ice. He rose to his full height, towering over the other man. The unspoken animosity between them crackled in the air. Lady Annelise was feeling faint. "I was merely assisting her." How very chivalrous, Croft purred, his smile widening. He offered his arm to Annelise. "In that case, Your Grace allow me to relieve you of your duty. I shall see Lady Annelise back inside. The Baron, her father, was just asking for her." The mention of her father sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Annelise. She had no choice but to take Croft's arm, though the touch of his velvet sleeve felt reptilian. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said to Alistair, her eyes pleading with him to understand. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, his face an unreadable mask, before turning on his heel and disappearing back into the shadows. As Croft led her back towards the glittering ballroom, his grip on her arm tightened. "You should be more careful, my dear," he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Spending time alone with a man of the Duke's reputation, a man who is all but engaged to another, could do irreparable damage to your own." "The Duke is my cousin and a gentleman," Annelise retorted, trying to pull her arm free, but his grip was like iron. "Of course. But perception is everything in our world, is it not?" He guided her to a less crowded corner of the room, where her father, Baron Beaumont, stood speaking with a group of older men. The Baron's face, usually jovial, was drawn and pale. When he saw them approach, a flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossed his features before being quickly masked. "Ah, Annelise, there you are," her father said, his voice overly bright. "Lord Croft, thank you for escorting my daughter." "The pleasure was all mine," Baron Croft said smoothly. He gave Annelise's hand a squeeze before releasing it. "We were just discussing the Baron's unfortunate luck at the card table last week. A terrible run of cards at White's. Simply terrible. Annelise's blood ran cold. White's Club, a notorious gambling den for the aristocracy, where fortunes were won and more often lost. Her father had promised her mother he would stop. The strained look on his face, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes, told her everything. Croft wasn't just a suitor. He was a predator who had found her family's weakness. The rest of the evening was a blur of misery. Annelise was forced to grant Croft the next waltz. As he spun her around the floor, his hand pressed uncomfortably low on her back. His whispers were venomous. "Your father is a good man, but a foolish one," he said, his breath hot against her ear. "He owes a great deal of money to some very impatient people. People who could make life very difficult for a man of his standing." "What do you want?" Annelise asked, her voice trembling. "You," he said simply, his eyes gleaming with a possessive fire. "Marry me and all his debts disappear. I am a very generous man, Annelise. I will give you everything you could ever desire. Jewels, gowns, a place in society that will be the envy of all. All I ask for is your hand." He paused, his grip tightening. "And your loyalty." The implication was clear. He wasn't just buying a wife. He was buying her silence, her obedience. He was buying the Beaumont name to legitimize his own, and he was using her father's shame as his lever. Later she saw Alistair again. He was in a heated, low-toned discussion with his mother, the formidable Dowager Duchess, a woman whose will was as unbending as iron. The Duchess's gaze kept flicking towards Lady Beatrice Finch, who stood nearby, a perfect porcelain doll. Annelise knew, with a sickening certainty, that Alistair was being backed into the same corner she was. He was being shackled by duty, just as she was being shackled by blackmail. She felt his eyes on her as Croft led her onto the floor for another dance. The pain and helplessness reflected in his gaze was a perfect mirror of her own. This was their reality. A gilded ballroom that had become their shared prison, where they could see each other across the floor, but could never hope to cross the divide. The music swelled, the dancers spun, and Annelise felt the walls closing in, suffocating her with the scent of wilting roses and silent desperation. The days that followed the Hartsworth Gala were a slow, agonizing torture. Lord Croft became a constant, unwelcome presence at their Mayfair home. He sent extravagant bouquets of flowers that filled the rooms with a cloying, funereal scent. He brought expensive gifts that Annelise left untouched in their velvet boxes. He was playing the part of the devoted suitor for the world to see, but in the moments they were alone, his mask would slip. One afternoon, he found her in the morning room, where she was trying to lose herself in a book. He did not wait to be announced. "Reading again, my dear," he said, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "You will have little time for such idle pursuits when you are my wife. Running my households will be a full-time occupation." Annelise placed her book down her fingers, marking her page. "Lord Croft, I have not agreed to be your wife." He laughed a short, unpleasant sound. He walked over to the window, gazing out at the bustling street. "Oh, but you will. I had another chat with your father this morning. His creditors are growing restless. One word from me, and the scandal would be in every gossip column from here to Edinburgh. Baron Beaumont bankrupted by gambling debts. Imagine the shame. Your sister Eleanor would find her first season quite difficult. No respectable family would want to associate with her. The mention of her bright, innocent younger sister was a knife to the gut. This was Croft's true cruelty. He knew she would sacrifice her own happiness, but he also knew she would never allow her family's, and especially Eleanor's future, to be destroyed. "You are a monster," she whispered, her voice thick with loathing. He turned from the window and gave her a chilling smile. "I am a practical man. I see something I want and I acquire it. You should be flattered." He crossed the room and stood before her, his shadow falling over her. "The Beaumont Grand Ball is in a fortnight. I expect you to accept my proposal publicly then. Your father has already agreed. It will be the social event of the year." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Smile, Annelise. You are about to become a very, very wealthy woman." He left her there trembling with a mixture of rage and despair. She was trapped. Every door had been locked, every escape route sealed. Meanwhile, at Beaumont House, the ducal residence overlooking Green Park, Alistair was facing his own executioner. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, had summoned him to her private study, a severe room filled with dark wood and the portraits of their unsmiling ancestors. "Alistair, we must conclude this matter of your marriage." She began, her voice devoid of warmth. She sat perfectly erect in her high-backed chair, her hands folded over a silver-topped cane. "Lady Beatrice is a perfect match. Her dowry will not only secure our finances for a generation, but an alliance with the Finch family will give us significant influence in Parliament and the city. It is your duty." "My duty," Alistair repeated the words, tasting like ash. "My duty is to my tenants, to my people." "Is it not also my duty to be happy?" His mother scoffed. "Happiness is a luxury for housemaids and poets. You are the Duke of Beaumont. Your life is not your own. It belongs to the title. Your grandfather understood that. Your father understood that. And you will understand that." Her eyes, the same stormy grey as his own, narrowed. "I have seen the way you look at the Baron's girl. Annelise, do not think me a fool. It is an unsuitable infatuation, and it ends now. She is a Beaumont, Alistair," argued his voice, rising. "She is a penniless branch of the family tree, with a fool for a father," the Duchess snapped, striking the floor with her cane. The sound echoed in the silent room. "You will do what is expected of you. The Beaumont Grand Ball is in 2 weeks' time. It is the perfect venue. You will announce your official betrothal to Lady Beatrice then. It is decided. And if I refuse," Alistair challenged, his jaw tight. His mother's expression turned to ice. "If you refuse, you will have proven that you care more for your own selfish whims than for the legacy of this family. You will have failed your father's memory. And I will make it my mission to see that every door in London is closed to that girl and her family. Do you think Lord Croft's interest in her is born of love? He is a vulture. Without your protection However distant he or someone like him will destroy her. By marrying Lady Beatrice, you secure the family and you ensure Annelise is left alone. Your dalliance will be forgotten, and she will find a suitable, if uninspired, match elsewhere. It is the kindest thing you can do for her." Alistair felt the cold logic of her words wrap around him like chains. His mother was wrong about Croft. The man would not leave Annelise alone, but she was right about the power of his position. Could he protect Annelise better by marrying another? By putting an unbreachable distance between them, would he force Croft to lose interest? Or was he simply condemning them both to a life of quiet misery? He looked at the portraits on the wall, at the stern faces of the dukes who had come before him. They had all made sacrifices. They had all put duty first. He felt their collective weight on his shoulders, crushing the last vestiges of his hope. His mother had given him an ultimatum, just as surely as Croft had given one to Annelise. The gilded cage had slammed shut. Alistair knew he couldn't let it end with his mother's cold decree. He couldn't simply vanish from Annelise's life and reappear at a grand ball with another woman on his arm. It was a coward's path, and whatever his faults, he was not a coward. He owed her a final conversation, an ending. He had to be the one to wield the knife to make a clean cut, no matter how much it wounded them both. He sent a clandestine note via a trusted footman, asking her to meet him in the same place where their story had truly begun, the British Museum, amidst the silent stoic marble of the Elgin collection. It was a public place, yet vast and quiet enough to allow for a private, final conversation. When Annelise arrived, her face was pale and drawn. She wore a simple day dress of dove grey, the colour of ashes and sorrow, and had a veil drawn over her hat as if to hide herself from the world. She looked fragile, as though a strong gust of wind might carry her away. He led her to a quiet corner behind a colossal statue of a Greek goddess who had been weathered by time but still stood resolute. The irony was not lost on him. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice sounding hollow and unfamiliar in his own ears. "I shouldn't have," she whispered, not looking at him. "Alistair, we are playing with fire. Lord Croft. He watches my every move. It is because of Croft, because of everything that I had to see you," he said, forcing himself to keep his distance, to not reach for her. "Annelise, what I am about to say. I need you to know that it is the hardest thing I have ever had to do." She finally looked up at him, her beautiful, intelligent eyes wide with a dawning dread. She knew. Of course she knew. She had always been able to read him, to see past the ducal armour to the man beneath. He took a deep breath, the cold, stale air of the museum filling his lungs. "My mother has made my duty clear. The future of the Beaumont estate, the welfare of my tenants. It all rests on me making a suitable marriage. An advantageous one." He hated the words, hated the way they sounded like a banker's ledger. "I am to be officially betrothed to Lady Beatrice Finch. The announcement will be made at the Beaumont ball." Each word was a hammer blow against her composure. He saw the last flicker of hope die in her eyes, leaving behind a profound and desolate emptiness. She didn't cry. He almost wished she would. Her silent pain was 1,000 times worse than tears. She simply nodded, her gaze dropping to the marble floor. "I see," she said, her voice a fragile thread. "She will make a fine duchess." "Annelise." He took a step forward, his hands aching to comfort her, but he stopped himself. To touch her now would be a form of exquisite torture for them both. He had to be cruel to be kind, or so he told himself. He had to make her believe this was his choice, his desire, so she could move on, so she could hate him. Hating him would be easier than mourning what they'd lost. "It is for the best," he said, his voice hardening into the cold, aristocratic tone he used in boardrooms and parliamentary sessions. "Our connection was an imprudence, a pleasant diversion, but ultimately an impossibility. You must see that. We must both be realistic about our stations in life." She flinched as if he had struck her. Now the tears came welling in her eyes and tracing silent paths down her pale cheeks. A diversion, she repeated, her voice cracking with disbelief and hurt. "Was that all it was to you, Alistair? A pleasant diversion from your ducal duties? What else could it be?" He pressed on, hating himself with every syllable. "I am the Duke of Beaumont. I have responsibilities you cannot possibly comprehend. I cannot afford flights of fancy." He saw the hurt in her eyes curdle into a quiet anger, a spark of the proud, resilient woman he adored. Good. Anger was better than despair. He knew he had to leave. If he stayed a moment longer, he would break. He would tell her everything about his mother's ultimatum, about his fear for her, about the suffocating weight of his title. He would fall to his knees and beg her to run away with him, consequences be damned. But he couldn't. Her family would be ruined. His legacy would crumble. He reached out, and for a fleeting second, his fingers brushed against her cheek, wiping away a single tear. Her skin was soft, and the contact sent a tremor through his entire body. "This is goodbye, Annelise," he whispered, the words tearing from his soul. He turned his back on her, then forcing himself to walk away to not look back. Every step was an agony. He could feel her eyes on his back, could feel the weight of her silent, shattered heart. He walked past the stoic gods and goddesses of antiquity, their marble eyes seeing nothing, and out into the grey, indifferent London afternoon, leaving the only vibrant living thing in his life behind, in a tomb of history and regret. The night of the Beaumont Grand Ball arrived cloaked in an oppressive inevitability. Annelise felt as if she were a condemned prisoner being led to her own execution. Her mother and sister had fussed over her for hours, oblivious to her inner turmoil. They chatted excitedly about the honor, the spectacle, the sheer magnificence of the event being held at Beaumont House itself. They dressed her in a gown of pale gold satin, a cruel mockery of the triumph she was supposed to be feeling. With her hair swept up in an elegant chignon and her mother's pearls cool against her throat, she looked the part of a radiant belle of the ball. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw only a ghost, her eyes haunted by a sorrow too deep for words. Lord Croft arrived to escort her, magnificent in his tailored evening dress. He presented her with an orchid, a hothouse flower, exotic, beautiful, and utterly out of place. "You look exquisite, my dear," he murmured, his eyes lingering on her with a disturbing possessiveness. "A true jewel. Soon you will be mine to display for all the world to see." Beaumont House was a palace of light and sound. Thousands of beeswax candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, casting a warm, dancing glow over the marble floors and gilded ceilings. The great ballroom was thronged with the cream of London society, a swirling kaleidoscope of vibrant silks, glittering diamonds and military decorations. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and wax, and the soaring notes of a Viennese waltz filled the vast space. It was all a beautiful, elaborate lie. For Annelise, the music was a funeral dirge. The glittering assembly was a gallery of judges. And this magnificent house, Alistair's home, was the most beautiful prison she had ever seen. Her father, looking haggard, despite his fine clothes, handed her over to Croft with a pained smile. "Enjoy yourself, my dear," he said, his voice strained. He could not meet her gaze. Annelise knew then that her fate was sealed. She danced with Croft, moving through the steps with mechanical precision. He held her too close, his hand a brand on her back. He pointed out important guests, whispering their secrets and scandals into her ear, already treating her as his co-conspirator. She felt sullied by his proximity, by the dark web he was weaving around her. And then she saw him. Alistair stood across the room, near the dais where the orchestra played. He was the epitome of ducal grace and power in his severe black evening wear. On his arm, draped in diamonds and emerald green silk, was Lady Beatrice Finch. She was laughing up at him, her head tilted at a perfect practiced angle. Alistair smiled down at her, but the smile did not reach his eyes. His eyes, Annelise saw, were scanning the crowd, searching. Their gazes met across the sea of dancers. For a single breathtaking moment, the world fell away. The noise, the music, the people, it all vanished. There was only Alistair. His face was a mask of torment, a silent scream of regret and despair that mirrored her own. She saw in his eyes the truth he had tried to hide behind his cruel words at the museum. This was not his choice. This was his sentence, just as tonight was hers. Lady Beatrice said something to him, breaking the spell. He turned his attention back to her, the ducal mask firmly in place once more. The moment was over. Annelise felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She needed to escape. "I require some air, my lord," she said to Croft, her voice weak. His smile was thin and humorless. "Of course. But do not stray too far. Our moment is fast approaching." He led her to the edge of the dance floor, near the open doors to the terrace, the very terrace where she and Alistair had shared their last moment of peace. She could see Alistair preparing to leave as well, intending to take his leave of the suffocating ballroom. He was walking towards a side exit. His shoulders slumped with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He was running away just as he had at the museum. He couldn't bear to witness her final public humiliation. The sight of him leaving, of him abandoning her to her fate, was the final twist of the knife. He had said his goodbye. He was keeping his word. The music swelled to a crescendo, and then, with a final flourish, it stopped. The dancers applauded their laughter and chatter filling the momentary silence. Annelise's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what was coming next. The cage was about to lock, and the whole world was here to watch. As the final notes of the waltz faded, a new, more dreadful sound began to fill the ballroom, the tapping of a knife against a crystal glass. The sound was sharp, insistent, cutting through the post-dance chatter and drawing every eye towards its source. Lord Percival Croft stood at the edge of the dance floor, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He had positioned himself perfectly in the center of the room, ensuring he was the focal point of everyone's attention. Annelise stood beside him, her blood turning to ice in her veins. She felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, a specimen for all to examine. "My lord's ladies, esteemed guests," Croft began his voice, booming with a confidence that sickened her. "May I have your attention for just a moment?" A hush began to fall over the vast room. The murmuring of the crowd quieted, replaced by a rustle of silk and a craned neck here and there. Guests turned from their conversations, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Public announcements at a ball of this magnitude were rare and usually signified something momentous, a betrothal, a political appointment. Annelise's gaze darted around the room in a desperate final search. She saw her father near the edge of the crowd, his face ashen, unable to watch. She saw the Dowager Duchess on her throne-like chair, her expression one of grim satisfaction, believing this moment was a neat and tidy resolution to her son's unfortunate infatuation. And she saw Alistair. He had stopped just short of the side exit he'd been heading towards. He had turned back, his body rigid, his face a thunderous mask of conflict. He had intended to flee to spare himself the sight of her ruin, but the sound of Croft's voice had been a leash yanking him back. He stood frozen a spectator at the demolition of his own world. "It is a rare and joyous occasion," Croft continued, placing a proprietary hand on the small of Annelise's back, "when two hearts and two houses find that their paths are destined to merge. It is with the utmost pleasure, and with the gracious permission of her esteemed father, Baron Beaumont." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation build. Annelise could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, their collective gaze, a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear herself away from his grasp, but her limbs were made of lead. She was paralyzed by the sheer, crushing force of societal expectation. "That I announce my intention to make the beautiful and virtuous Lady Annelise Beaumont my wife." A wave of polite gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was it. The trap had sprung. Croft's words hung in the air, echoing in the vast, gilded space. He raised his glass, his eyes gleaming with victory. "To my future bride, to Lady Annelise." He turned to her, his smile a grotesque parody of affection, expecting her to blush and curtsy to play her part in this meticulously orchestrated farce. But she could not move. She could not breathe. All the sound in the world seemed to rush out of the ballroom at once, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The murmurs of the guests died. The rustling of fabric ceased. Even the flicker of the 1,000 candles seemed to hold its breath. In that moment, the entire magnificent ballroom fell completely and utterly silent. It was a silence born of shock and expectation. A silence that demanded an answer. Every single person was looking at her, waiting for her to smile, to nod, to give some sign of assent that would seal her fate forever. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible, suffocating thing. It was the sound of her life ending. It was the sound of her spirit breaking. And it was in that profound, terrible silence that the world shifted on its axis. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered every whisper, every breath. Annelise stood at its epicenter, a statue carved from ice, her mind a maelstrom of panic and despair. This was the end. Croft had won. She closed her eyes, bracing for the final damning act of her surrender. Then a voice, low, cold, and laced with steel, cut through the stillness. "I think not." The two words were not shouted, but they resonated through the hall with the force of a cannon blast. A collective gasp swept through the crowd as every head turned towards the side of the room. Alistair Beaumont was striding towards them. He was no longer the conflicted man hesitating by the exit. He had returned from the brink, and in his eyes burned a righteous fury that seemed to make the very air around him shimmer. He moved with a purpose that was terrifying to behold the crowd parting before him, as if by an invisible force. His ducal mask was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, powerful man beneath. All pretense of duty and resignation had been incinerated in the fire of this one unbearable moment. The sight of Annelise's face, so pale, so broken in that suffocating silence, had been the catalyst. It was a silent scream he could not ignore. He had turned his back on her once in the cold halls of the museum. He would be damned to hell before he did it again. He reached the center of the floor and stopped directly in front of Lord Croft, ignoring the lesser man completely. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, were fixed on Annelise. He saw the flicker of disbelief, the fragile spark of hope ignite in the depths of her gaze. "Your Grace," Croft stammered, his confident smirk finally faltering. He tried to puff out his chest to reclaim his authority. "This is a private family matter." "You will be silent," Alistair commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl without once looking at Croft. "You will unhand my cousin. Now." There was no questioning the order. It was the voice of a duke who had just remembered the full extent of his power and was prepared to unleash it. Croft, for all his bluster, was a bully who had just come face to face with a lion. He snatched his hand back from Annelise's waist as if he'd been burned. Alistair's gaze softened as it remained on Annelise. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice, now gentle, meant only for her. She could only nod, tears welling in her eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming, unbelievable relief. He then turned his head slowly, deliberately, and fixed Lord Percival Croft with a look of such pure, undiluted contempt that the other man physically recoiled. "You, sir, are a snake and a coward," Alistair stated, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You prey on the honourable to feed your own pathetic ambition. You use debt and shame as your weapons because you possess no honour of your own. This is an outrage." Croft blustered, his face turning a blotchy red. "Slander. The Baron himself agreed to this union. The Baron was under duress." Alistair countered, his voice like the crack of a whip. "You blackmailed him, holding his gambling debts over his head to force his daughter's hand. Did you really think such a grubby little secret would not come to my attention?" He reached into his breast pocket and produced a small folded piece of paper. It was the Baron's marker, the note of his debt. "I took the liberty of purchasing your father's debt this afternoon." My Lord Alistair said, his eyes still locked on Croft. "All of it. It is now owed to me. And as the holder of that debt, I consider it paid in full in exchange for you vanishing from this house and from this family's life. If I ever see you near Lady Annelise again, I will use the full weight of my name to see you ruined so completely that you will not be welcome in a tavern in Whitechapel, let alone a ballroom in Mayfair." He let the paper fall from his fingers to the floor, a final dismissive gesture. The crowd erupted in a flurry of shocked whispers. Lady Beatrice looked on her face, pale with humiliation, but also a strange hint of relief. The Dowager Duchess sat frozen on her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Alistair paid them no mind. He had eyes only for one person. He turned back to Annelise, his heart in his throat. He had just detonated his own life, shattered his duties, and declared war on the society that governed their world. And he had never felt more free. He stepped closer, taking her trembling hands in his. "Annelise," he said, his voice now shaking with the force of his emotion. "I am a fool. I tried to walk away. I tried to do my duty, but my duty is to my heart, and my heart is yours. It has always been yours." Right there in the centre of the silent, scandalized ballroom, Duke Alistair Beaumont went down on one knee before Lady Annelise. The collective gasp of the entire assembly was so sharp it seemed to tear the very fabric of the air. A duke did not kneel, not for a queen, unless in a formal ceremony of fealty, and certainly not for the daughter of a minor baron in the middle of his own ballroom. It was a shocking, profound breach of a protocol as old as the title itself. Yet here was Alistair Beaumont, the powerful, inscrutable duke, kneeling on the cold marble floor, his carefully constructed world shattered at his feet, his stormy eyes filled with a raw, desperate vulnerability as he looked up at the only woman who had ever truly seen him. For Annelise, the world tilted, and then swam back into a sharp, brilliant focus. Her mind, which seconds before had been a maelstrom of panic and despair, was suddenly startlingly clear. This was real. The man she loved, who she thought she had lost forever, was kneeling before her, offering her not just his heart, but his entire world, in full view of the society that had tried to tear them apart. He held her hands tightly, his grip a grounding force in the storm he had just unleashed. "I was wrong," he said, his voice clear and resonant, a public confession for all to hear. "I spoke of duty and stations of logic and responsibility. I was a fool, trying to solve an equation of the heart with the cold arithmetic of the mind. I thought honor meant sacrificing my happiness for my title. I see now that true honor is fighting for the one person who gives that title meaning. And that is you, Annelise. It has always been you." Tears streamed freely down Annelise's face, now washing away the fear and despair, leaving only a radiant, heart-stopping joy. She was no longer a pawn in a cruel game, but the cherished queen of this man's heart. "I have loved you from afar," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, ignoring the frantic whispers that were now erupting throughout the room. "I have admired your wit in conversations, but I have cherished your silence in the garden. I have seen the fire in you, the passion you hide behind your polite smiles and perfect curtsies. I have no shipping empire to offer you, only a heart that has been yours since the moment I first saw you trying to sketch a wilting rose. I have no grand alliance, only my own love and my own name to give you. Annelise Beaumont, will you do me the profound honor of forgiving my foolishness? Will you marry me?" For a moment, Annelise was speechless, her heart so full it felt it might burst. She looked from Alistair's upturned, earnest face to the shocked expressions of the crowd. She saw Lord Croft, his face purple with rage, being subtly escorted from the room by two of Alistair's footmen. She saw the apoplectic fury on the Dowager Duchess's face, a gorgon on her throne. And she saw her father, pushing his way through the crowd, his face streaked with tears of shame and overwhelming relief. Finding her voice, which had been stolen by fear, she answered not with a whisper, but with a strength that came from a place of deep, unwavering certainty. With a watery laugh that sounded like a brook in the springtime, she squeezed his hands. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and ringing. She gently tugged his hands, urging him to rise. "Yes, Alistair." "Get up, you fool." "Of course my answer is yes." Alistair surged to his feet, a brilliant, breathtaking smile transforming his severe features. He looked younger, lighter, a man unshackled. He framed her face with his hands, and ignoring the hundreds of pairs of eyes watching them, he kissed her. It was not a chaste, polite kiss. It was a kiss of homecoming, a desperate claiming after a long and painful exile. For Alistair, it was the shattering of a dam, releasing a flood of emotion he had kept locked away for years. For Annelise, it was the ultimate vindication, a public seal on a private love, a feeling of being so thoroughly cherished that the rest of the world and its judgment simply melted into insignificance. A smattering of applause broke out, led by the younger, more romantic members of the assembly, quickly growing into a wave of enthusiastic clapping that drowned out the scandalized hisses of the old guard. They had just witnessed the greatest drama of the season, a love story more compelling than any play on the West End. Alistair finally broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. "I love you," he murmured, a simple truth that had changed everything. "I love you too." She breathed back, her world finally wonderfully settling into place. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a silent promise of an unbreakable bond. The first person to reach them was her father. The Baron Beaumont looked from his daughter's radiant face to the Duke's resolute one. "Your Grace," he began, his voice cracking, I have failed my daughter. I have failed my name. I cannot thank you enough. You will give Annelise away to me at the altar." Alistair said, his voice firm, but not unkind. "That is all the thanks I require." With a nod of profound gratitude, the Baron stepped back. Alistair then led Annelise towards the dais, stopping before his mother. The Dowager Duchess's face was like a thundercloud. "You have created a scandal that will be spoken of for decades." She hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You have made a mockery of your name, of your father's memory." On the contrary, Mother Alistair replied, his voice respectful but unyielding. "I have finally honored it by ensuring its future is built on truth, not on a loveless transaction. I will be marrying Annelise. I hope in time you will offer us your blessing, but if you do not, I will marry her all the same." He did not wait for a reply. He turned, guiding Annelise past a pale but composed Lady Beatrice. He paused for a moment. "Lady Beatrice," he said quietly, "I am truly sorry for this public humiliation. You deserve a man who can give you his whole heart." Beatrice Finch looked at him, and then at Annelise, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Do not worry, Your Grace," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You have just saved me from a life of polite boredom. I wish you both all the joy you have so scandalously fought for." With a final graceful nod, she turned and walked away, a figure of unexpected dignity. Alistair finally led Annelise away from the chaos, out of the gilded cage of the ballroom, and onto the cool, quiet terrace, under the forgiving gaze of the moon. The night air was a balm after the heat and pressure of the room. The sounds of the scandalized party faded to a distant hum. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he might never let go. "They will talk," he murmured into her hair. "The papers will be merciless. My mother may never forgive me." Annelise leaned back, placing her hands on his chest. She looked into his eyes, seeing no trace of regret, only a deep and abiding love. "Let them talk," she said, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. "Their words are just noise. We have the silence. We have the truth." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that was hers alone. He had whispered goodbye in the shadows, but in the glaring spotlight of a silent ballroom, he had returned. Not as a duke bound by duty, but as a man, her man, who had come home to his heart, ready to face the dawn of their new, unwritten, and beautifully real life together. And so the Duke of Beaumont, who had once whispered goodbye, chose to shout his love in the face of scandal and duty. Annelise, who had been silenced by fear, found her voice in his embrace. Theirs was a love forged in secret glances and forbidden whispers, tested by blackmail and betrayal, and finally declared in the one moment that mattered. A love that proved that even when the world falls silent, the heart speaks its own truth, loud and clear for all to hear. Their path forward would not be easy, but together they would face it, their hands and their hearts forever entwined. If you were captivated by Annelise and Alistair's dramatic journey from a heartbreaking goodbye to a triumphant reunion, don't let their story end here. Please press the like button to show your support. Share this tale of courageous love with fellow romantics, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories of love against all odds. Your support makes these stories possible. Thank you for listening.